Professor Béteille and Professor Hegde. I'm very happy to be here with you this afternoon. I do want to stress that this is not my first visit, and one of the persons from an earlier visit is sitting right there, Professor Kalidas Sen, and I was asking the Vice-Chancellor about Professor Shinoy, the Professor of Physics. I remember, oddly enough, in that visit, I spent most of my time with a physicist and a chemist talking about science. And I'm very moved by the introduction given to me and my work by Professor Hegde. Perhaps we could talk about that on another occasion. I just wanted to complete the record. I just want to say that I have completed a longish paper on my own work in the context of the work that we do in the Indian university system, and particularly in the Delhi School of Economics. And the only thing I would like to stress about that argument is that I have been a passionate believer in the unity of sociology and social anthropology. I've been a committed believer in the unity of sociology and social anthropology. And I do not believe that the world of humanity should be divided between the study of advanced societies and the study of primitive societies. That is the basis on which the division between sociology and anthropology emerged in the late 19th, early 20th century. These are things which we will talk about. I just want to point out that there is a journal which is called the Annual Review of Anthropology. It used to be a biennial review of anthropology. It would be published every 2 years, every alternate year, but now it is published every year. The format of the Annual Review of Anthropology is to pick a broad theme for each year, maybe religion, maybe kinship, family, and get about 16 to 18 scholars to write around that theme. Plus, they do something else. They have what they call one overview article. For the overview article, they invite one living anthropologist to write about himself and his work in his own way. And that is the liberty which they give to someone who has crossed the age of retirement. So I chose to speak, the title of my piece is Ourselves and Others. Does it really make very much difference whether we are studying our own society or studying other societies? How should we address this problem? And this is a problem which has engaged the attention of many students of society. I know that it engaged the attention of Professor M.N. Srinivas, and I would talk with him and tell him that, he had written an excellent book on religion and society among the Poors. And he had written very interesting papers on religion. I would say to him that, Professor Srinivas, I would expect from you, given your standard, given your standing, and given the work that you have done, I would expect from you that you write at least one paper on religion and society, in general, and not just on India or on Hinduism. Because I do believe that the essence of sociology or social anthropology is the comparative study of all human societies. This is a very, very difficult thing to do. Maybe these are some issues that we will take up at the interaction session or at the discussion session later on. Or maybe the Vice-Chancellor will consider inviting me on another occasion to talk about this particular thing, because it has been a great preoccupation with me. I know that I'm following a line of very distinguished speakers. I know Romila very well. In fact, coming back to my memoirs, Romila was present at a small gathering, a very small gathering, a small dinner, which was organized by my publisher for meeting people and talking about the book. I didn't allow them to talk about the book or about myself. We had a very excellent dinner, but each one of them got a copy of the book. And Romila wrote me a postcard the next morning. She said, I've been reading your memoir, it's so very good, but I'm so disappointed that I don't figure in it, because I didn't know Romila at the time where the memoir ends. These are by way of introducing myself and my interest in the related disciplines of sociology and anthropology. Yes, Professor Hegde, you are quite right that at that time, when I entered the Delhi School of Economics, I had had a bit too much of the old-fashioned anthropology, and I did not relish being labeled as an anthropologist. At that time, I preferred to be regarded as a sociologist, because I thought at that time that anthropologists were studying peculiar customs of peculiar people, whereas sociologists were concerned with the things that were of real interest to the actual world in which we live. But I think that is rather a naive view, which I then held, of the distinction between sociology and anthropology. I think we study all human, and every society is worthy of the same respect and the same respectful attention that any other society is. So this is the way in which I look at the study of society. I've traveled a long way, and Professor Hegde is right in pointing to the distance that I have traveled. When I wrote my first book, Caste, Class and Power, I had a rather naive way of looking at the world. I thought that value judgments were one thing and judgments of reality were a different thing, and that is questions, or questions that relate to what exists, can be, should be, and must be separated from ought questions, or questions that relate to what ought to exist. And I believed then not only that the principal task of sociology is to concern itself with is questions, that is, describe and analyze what exists and how it has come to be what it is, in which direction it may possibly be moving, rather than talking about what ought to exist. Study the family, study the varieties of family. In a country like India, you can always do that, but not pass judgment on this type of family is better than that type of family. The best example that I can think of is from the field of kinship. In India, we have the Tarwad in Kerala. One of my former students has done a thesis on the Tarwad, a lady called Janaki Abraham. She's done a thesis on the Tarwad. This is the matrilineal household in Kerala, among the Tiyas in Malabar. And M.N. Srinivas himself has written about the Okkas, which is a patrilineal household, patrilineal joint household. If someone were to ask me which is superior, the Tarwad or the Okka, I would not consider it to be a question within my province of analysis. So this is how I looked at it at that time. This is how I still look at it. Although at that time, I thought it was a very easy thing to do. That is questions are is questions and ought questions are ought questions. And it's not a really important thing, provided you have a clear idea, provided you know what you want to do, you can separate is questions from ought questions. Today, I realize that this is an extremely difficult thing to do. But I believe that the attempt must still be made, however difficult it may be, to separate is questions from ought questions. Because when you concern yourself with ought questions, it is very easy to smuggle in your own prejudices in the name of lofty, elevated values which are. So you leave it to people who are concerned with the society, who are concerned with changing the society in which they live, to address those questions. I think it is a separate task to study what actually exists, whether in the domain of family, kinship, marriage, or in the domain of religion. Is Hinduism superior to Islam? This is an odd question. And his question is, how does Hinduism function in the temple, in the home? And how does Islam function in the mosque, in the school, in the home, and so on? And I think that sociologists are at their best, whether they are sociologists or anthropologists, they are at their best in addressing is questions rather than ought questions. But as I said, the separation, no matter how desirable it is, is a very difficult one. And one has to strive continuously to maintain that separation and to ensure that one's own prejudices are not smuggled in the name of value judgments which are universally valid. I don't think that one should do that. And I think that Weber was the one who was most conscious of this. The need to keep his questions separate from alt questions, and also the difficulty of doing it consistently. I think he was very, very conscious of this. Durkheim was also, of course, it was Durkheim who wrote this famous paper, Value Judgments and Judgments of Reality. I think Durkheim believed that if you found the right method, you could do it without too much difficulty. Weber never thought that it could be done without a great deal of difficulty. Now, the kind of question that I want to discuss with you today is very different from the kind of question that I addressed when I wrote my PhD thesis on caste, class and power. It's a very different kind of question, and it is particularly a question from which it is very difficult to separate his questions from alt questions. So, I think that I will begin by pointing out that many people seem to be somewhat despondent about the prospects of democracy in India. I think that we should be very critical about the way in which democracy is functioning in India, but I do not feel despondent about the prospects for democracy in India. I do not feel despondent about that. I do believe that in India, democracy has come to stay. I believe that. But then the question is, what kind of democracy? It's not enough to say. I have a friend who has a talent for catchy phrases, and this is Ramchandra Guha. Ramchandra Guha has been saying, or once said, that India is a 50% democracy. And I told him, Ram, you should tone it down a little. I think you should be prepared to say that it is a 45% democracy. That wouldn't worry me too much. If it came down below 40%, then I would start worrying. I think that there are many distinctive aspects of the way in which democracy has settled down in India, which makes many people somewhat anxious. I think they should be anxious, but they should not be despondent. Because I think that those of us who are concerned or interested in the study of democracy should ask themselves an obvious question: is there one standard model of democracy? Is there a standard model of democracy? And as soon as you ask yourself that question, you will realize that, of course, there isn't a single standard model of democracy, either in its constitutional form, because there is a variety of democratic constitutions. The American Constitution is not the same as the French Constitution. They are both democratic or republican constitutions, but they are not the same. The English don't have a written constitution, but constitutional practices and constitutional discussion are such that we can form a good idea of the Westminster model of democracy. It's called the Westminster model of democracy. Now, if we look at our own democracy, we find that we started with a great deal of admiration for the Westminster model. That was the model to which we attached ourselves when we became independent and when we wrote our constitution. There were many differences between Pandit Nehru and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. But on this one point, I think they were in agreement that this is the model which we should adopt and try to live up to. Have we been able to live up to the Westminster model? No, I don't think so. Is that such a bad thing? I'm not quite so sure. I think that we still have a great deal to learn from the Westminster model, but I don't think that we should be fixated on the Westminster model and judge every malfunctioning of the political system in India in terms of the Westminster model. Our democracy is very much more turbulent than what prevails in India. But there was this consensus, or broad consensus at the time of independence, that democracy, our goal, our aim, should be to live up to the Westminster model if we are to pass muster as a democracy. A broad consensus, I would say, in the Constituent Assembly. I think Pandit Nehru, Sardar Patel, B.R. Ambedkar, they all. But the consensus was not an absolute consensus. And this is something I want to point out. Even at that time, even when the Constitution was being written, the consensus about the Westminster model was not happening. There were people who had other views. The communists had a different view of what kind of political order we ought to have. They dismissed the Westminster model as bourgeois democracy, which is the democracy of a particular class. And Dr. Ambedkar dealt with that objection. Dr. Ambedkar, at the end of the deliberations, he said that I'm really very happy that so many people have praised me for the work that the Constituent Assembly has done. He was the chairman of the drafting committee. I'm so very happy and I'm grateful. And they have praised me beyond my expectation and beyond my deserts. But he said, of course, the communists are not satisfied with this. But then the communists don't believe in parliamentary democracy. They believe in the dictatorship of the proletariat. I'm not unhappy that they're not happy with me. But what he did not mention, openly or directly, was that the Gandhians were not entirely happy. They had an alternative model of democracy. And that alternative model of, whereas the Leninist model of a political order has now withdrawn increasingly throughout the world, the Gandhian ideal of a proper, satisfactory political system is still with us. And I think it will continue to be with us. And it is there that I think we should look to the trends of development in Indian politics, in Indian democracy. Gandhi was a Democrat, but he had a very different conception of democracy from what the Constitution presents to us. And in what way was that different? Now, in the modern world, political leaders practically everywhere want to present their political system as a democracy. But they qualify it by saying that this is not bourgeois democracy, this is what we have is people's democracy, and what the others have is bourgeois democracy, and that is not a very satisfactory or a happy thing. But that view has now gradually faded away. So what remains? What is it that defines democracy as a specific form of political system? I think what defines democracy as a specific form of political system is the place that it always has for opposition and dissent. That, I think, is the defining feature of democracy as a political system. Not only is opposition present, there is opposition in all political systems, but in some they're driven underground. Whereas it is only in democracies that opposition is acknowledged as right, proper and desirable. Otherwise it's not a democracy. If the leader of a certain country comes and says that we don't have any opposition, we are a democracy but we don't have any opposition because we take care of all the interests of all the people, then you should be suspicious about that kind of a political system where all the problems have been solved, where there is no longer any room for opposition, where they have reached paradise. One should be unhappy with that kind of a situation. But I think I'd be inherently suspicious of any political system that claims to be a democracy but denies that there is any opposition within it. So that opposition then goes underground, and it takes many forms, many of them pathological, until it bursts forward in Tahrir Square or somewhere else, somewhere in the world. I think that the essence of democracy is that it regards opposition as an important and a central feature of a healthy political order. So then the question arises, if that is so, if democracy is so important to, if opposition is so important to democracies, then how is that opposition articulated? If opposition is acknowledged, recognized, and regarded as legitimate, is opposition articulated in the same way in all democracies? Because after all democracies do not have the same form of government. So why should we expect all democracies to have the same form of opposition? I think, personally, that if you look at the textbooks of political science, you will find that democracies are classified in terms of the forms of government, presidential system, parliamentary system, and so on. But it occurs to me that perhaps a better way of classifying democracies would be in terms of the forms of opposition. Because if we agree that recognized, acknowledged opposition is what is crucial to democracy, then why don't we start at the other end and see what are the forms in which opposition is organized? And this is really what I wanted to put before you. One way of organizing opposition is through the relationship between political parties. Ruling party and the opposition party. The treasury benches and the opposition benches. Now this can be arranged in various ways. In Parliament, the treasury benches may consist of a coalition of parties, and the opposition benches may, in their turn, also consist of a coalition of parties. Our way of thinking about government and opposition, partly because we took off from the Westminster model, was basically a two-party system. But it may be two coalitions of parties and not just two parties. And coalitions of parties create their own problems. But, I don't think that in India, a two-party system, or even what is called in Europe a multi-party system, is likely to work. It's not likely to work for a variety of reasons, historical and otherwise. In Europe, when they talk about, they say that Britain and the United States are two-party systems, whereas France, Germany, the Netherlands, they're multi-party systems. By multi-party, they mean 3, 4, or at most 5 parties. But with us, it's a multitude of parties. So it is a multi-party system in the technical sense of the term, but it is a multi-party system of a very special kind. And we have to look for the reasons behind the development of so many political parties, each trying to articulate a particular view of democracy. I think the reasons lie partly in the structure of our society. It's this vast scale and diversity of our society. It is a society of very large scale and very large diversity. I think that in some of the states, if we go down from the union level to the state level, we might come closer to the model of an alternation in government and opposition between two parties or two sets of parties. In the center, that becomes much more difficult because we are dealing with a much more... but nevertheless, I believe, despite all these difficulties, the importance of articulating opposition through a party or a coalition of parties in Parliament is a very important part of democracy. And I think historically, political parties have played a very important part in structuring the relationship between government and opposition. They played but political parties are not all that old, even in Europe. The party as an institution for the articulation of a specific set of political interests as against another set of political interests which will be articulated by a different party is not all that old. Even in England, political parties began to come into their own only in the early 19th century. And then they grew. They grew in response to a particular need. They grew in response to the need of electoral politics. As the franchise came to be expanded, parties became extremely important as instruments for the mobilization of political support and for the articulating the relationship between government and opposition. So that is something which happened, and I do want to point out that the development of political parties is not all that old in the West, and particularly the two-party system is relatively new. I mean, it goes back to the 19th century. Before the 19th century, there were caucuses, there were factions, there were cliques, but there were no parties as political institutions. By the way, I want to draw a distinction between a party and a faction. A party is an institution. The Congress Party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, the Communist Party of India is a permanent body which exists independently of its individual members at a particular point of time. It has a building, it has an office, and it continues. None of the members of the Indian National Congress or the Labour Party today are the same as the members 100 years ago. As old members die out or leave, new members come in, but the party remains the same. That's what I mean by an institution as against a faction. In a faction, it is much more person-centered than in a political party. The BJP is a political, it has an office, it has an undying continuity over time. A faction doesn't. A faction comes and goes with a particular individual, and members join or leave factions in a much more personalized way than is possible within the political party. The point is that in India, political parties often tend to borrow some of the styles of functioning of factions, and factions do penetrate into political parties. But nevertheless, I would say that the growth of political parties in India and the part that they play in parliament is not to be dismissed lightly, and you will understand the significance of this when you compare it with what is happening in some of the other countries, from Tunisia to Cairo to Iraq to Iran. You will understand this. Our political parties do have a kind of continuity which makes them somewhat different from the factions which come and go, which rise and fall. Now, that is one thing, and I think that one of the peculiar features of the political party, the party system in India. By the way, I want to point out that the Indian National Congress is one of the oldest political parties in the world. It is older than the Labour Party of Britain. It was established in 1885, whereas the Labour Party was established only in 1900. It's older than the Communist Party of the Soviet Union or the Communist Party of China. It's one of the oldest political parties in the world. It's not only one of the oldest political parties in the world, it has established a peculiar place for itself in the national life of the country, which makes it rather different. I'm not saying it makes it better, but it makes it rather different from all other political parties. Because until the time of independence, there were in India, when we were under colonial rule, there were in India basically two main parties, the Congress Party and the Muslim League. And it's obvious that the Congress Party stood for the unity of India and the Muslim League stood for the partition of India. With the partition of India, of course, the Congress Party became preeminent, and it carried with itself this notion that we are the ones who represent the unity of this nation, and we have done so for all time, and we will continue to do so. All other parties are parties which represent sectional interests. This claim of the Congress Party that it represents the whole country has in some ways distorted the operation of the party system in India. One of the persons who who saw the significance of this fairly early was the political scientist Rajni Kothari. He argued that India is neither a one-party nor a two-party system. It is a system of one-party dominance. It allows other parties, but in all parts of the country, it has a certain place, and it has always represented itself as a party of national unity, and other parties as parties of the right wing, religious parties, regional parties. They don't represent the national interest. In the eyes of the Congress, I'm not saying that this is a valid statement, but in the eyes of the Congress, there are regional parties, there are religious parties, there are sectarian parties, but they don't represent the national. They are not sufficiently inclusive. We are the only truly inclusive party in this country, and this makes the Congress party, and those who are supporters of the Congress, and there are many who are legitimate supporters of the Congress party, have a peculiar feeling, a peculiarly possessive feeling about the political system of the country. You see, they have this feeling that if the Congress party is ousted from power, that will be the end of democracy, that will be the end of the nation. I think I know that there are lots of persons in the Congress party who are there for self-serving reasons. But there are also some who bring in a kind of idealism. But it's a kind of idealism which is important, which, my goodness, is that the BJP retaliating? The most well-meaning supporters of the Congress party feel that if our party goes, whether it's the Communist Party or the BJP or some Muslim sectarian party or the DMK, that is a threat and a blow to the unity of India. We are the only ones who are the guardians who stand for the unity of India. And this argument is very deeply felt by many people. And therefore, they feel that to support any other party is an act of treachery. It's some kind of a betrayal. And this puts such people in a peculiar position. The position is this, that if by democracy you mean the legitimacy of opposition, what kind of an acknowledgement of the legitimacy of opposition is this if you are not prepared to accept that some other political party can also run this country reasonably well? This is not the attitude that political parties in Britain or the United States have, because they don't have the same historical legacy which the Congress party has, uses, abuses and misuses. In Britain, for instance, if David Cameron is removed, or if his party loses, David Cameron will not believe that that is the end of Britain. He'll be unhappy that my party has been eased out of power, that the Labour Party will make a mess of things, but we will mark our time and come back again. They don't have this belief that there is a unique responsibility of one political party to see that this country is held together, that this country progresses, that this country develops. This is a peculiar view that the Congress leaders, the better elements in the Congress leadership, hold. And I'm pretty sure that the Prime Minister of India holds that view very strong. That, it's all very well to talk about democracy, opposition and all. But what will happen, do you think? What is the opposition party which you would like to promote and support? Have you thought about it? If that comes in, then the whole country will be in disarray. Now this is a peculiar conception of democracy, that democracy will not allow any party other than one's own party to run the country. This is not the view. I'm sure that the supporters of Obama were very relieved when Romney was defeated. I'm sure. But even if Romney had won, and even if the Republicans come back in 2016, I don't think that they will feel that this is the end of the United States, or that this is the end of democracy in the United States. I think we tend to think, and that is a peculiar paradox. We believe in democracy, We believe in democracy. The supporters of the Congress Party certainly believe in democracy, but they are not prepared to acknowledge or even think of the safety and security and the future of India being in proper hands if any party other than the Congress Party comes in. So this kind of jealous attitude, this possessive attitude with supporters of the Congress Party, which is still the most important party in the country, it is in some ways, it contradicts the very spirit and the very essence of democracy, which requires that you allow the other party to have a spell in office and build yourself up so that you can come back again and do what needs to be done. So this is how the party system stands today and where it has taken us. I feel that the party system continues to do useful work in Parliament and outside Parliament. Despite all the noise that it makes in Parliament, I do believe that the party system is interesting and will continue to do useful work. But I don't think that the party system is all that there is to the articulation of opposition. In addition to the party system, there is the social movement. There are many people who feel that the best way of resisting the government, of articulating opposition to the government, is not through an opposition party in Parliament, but by mobilizing the people and developing a social movement. And you will see this, not just Gandhi. This was Gandhi. Gandhi wanted the Congress Party to be dissolved. Gandhi did not believe in a two-party or a multi-party system. Gandhi believed in partyless democracy. Gandhi believed that parties created all kinds. He had a conception of democracy which I would call a communitarian democracy. And he didn't believe. And Gandhi's legacy was continued after independence by Jayaprakash Narayan. Jayaprakash Narayan believed in partyless democracy. He had experimented with all kinds of things. And when JP gave the call for partyless democracy, I think it raised many echoes. I cannot imagine a leader like JP, who was a man of quite some standing, and whose integrity was beyond question, beyond report. I cannot imagine such a man appealing to the electorate or to the population in England or America or France, saying that parties are no good, we should go to the people will decide. I don't think so. I think this is a peculiarly Indian phenomenon, and many people were somewhat dismayed when Anna Hazare came out and started his movement, and Kejriwal has gone back to the party system. He started his own party. But I don't think that this idea that opposition should be articulated through a social movement rather than a political party is going to die out in India. I don't think it's going to die out. And I think this is what will give to Indian democracy its distinctive features as against democracy in Britain, France, the United States, and so on. This interplay between the party as a vehicle of opposition and the social movement as a vehicle of opposition. I think the party is there to stay, including opposition parties. But opposition parties do not satisfy all well-meaning Democrats, all reflective Democrats in this country. They want something more than that. And they have something in their own political tradition which goes back to the period before independence to fall back upon, and that is the social movement. Gandhi, but of course, the social movement, leaving things to a social movement is a chance, because the party system does all this in a reasonably orderly way. A social movement is tricky for the simple reason that the party is an institution in a sense in which the social movement is not. If the BJP in opposition behaves badly, or the Congress in office behaves badly, you can always wait for them to come back for your vote at the time of the next election. But who are the people who are running the social movement? They're here now. It has a kind of elusive character which makes it very difficult to see it as doing the job of opposition in a continuing and in a permanent way, in the way in which a political party does. So political parties do not have the kind of legitimacy, they have not acquired the kind of legitimacy that political parties in two-party or three-party or four-party systems have. But they will continue to exist because I think they play a useful role. But they will have to coexist with other forms and expressions of opposition based on the social movement. Now many people say that the social movement is a recipe for chaos and disorder. I think that a certain amount of chaos and disorder is the fate of democracy in India, and I don't think that we should necessarily feel that all is lost because there is a certain amount of disorder in our country, much more disorder than in the British, the French, the Dutch, or the American political system. It's not as if all European political systems have been paragons of order. France under the Third and Fourth Republics was a very, very disorderly country, but they have come. I think this kind of disorder will be very much with us because the leaders of political movements or social movements may seek their inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi, but they do not follow the conduct that Mahatma Gandhi prescribed for people. You know, Mahatma Gandhi was the great architect of civil disobedience movement. But Mahatma Gandhi believed that a man has first of all, he believed that the civil disobedience was primarily a moral and secondarily a political thing. And he believed that the civil disobedient must submit himself to stricter standards of moral scrutiny than the ordinary citizen. Only then will you have the right to claim respect as a civil disobedient if you are prepared to submit your conduct to stricter standards of moral scrutiny than the ordinary citizen is required to do. And I don't think that is going to happen in India. So, I would end by an observation made by a great sociologist who said, the movement of knowledge is a disorderly movement. I think that's a profound statement. Scientists particularly like to think that you proceed from one discovery to another on a linear path in a perfectly orderly way. That's not how knowledge develops. Movement of knowledge is a disorderly movement, and it still leads to progress. And I would say that the movement of democracy is necessarily also a disorderly movement, and we should not lose heart. But of course we should worry when this disorder leads to total non-functioning of our institutions. So that is where I would like to end, and thank you very much for being patient despite all the threats from above that we would